muffled heart sounds, distended neck veins. It's tension tamponade.
I'm sorry. And you are?
His pressure is 60 and falling. He has minutes, not imaging.
I won't have a nurse dictate a surgical timeline in my bay. Call the OR. 10 minutes. And get her back to whatever she was doing.
He doesn't have 10 minutes. And no order is coming. I stopped waiting for those a long time ago. Move.
The monitor hit the floor before anyone screamed. By sunrise, she would be escorted out of Ashford Memorial with her badge in a plastic bag, and every senior surgeon on the third floor would swear under oath that what she did was reckless, unlawful, and a violation of everything the profession stood for. They would be right about the law, they would be wrong about the rest. Because in the 90 seconds it took her to break the rules, the senator's only son went from a flat green line to a heartbeat. And the man who had refused to lift a scalpel, the chief of surgery with monogrammed cuffs and a slow, elegant pen, stood in the doorway of that trauma bay and watched a nurse do the thing he had already written off as impossible. Her name was Celine Marsh, and they were about to learn exactly who they had been ignoring. She had worked the night shift at Ashford for 3 years, and in 3 years she had learned the particular arithmetic of being overlooked. The residents called her by her last name if they called her anything. The attendings looked through her the way people look through furniture they have stopped noticing. She was the one who moved the chairs and restocked the crash cart and stood against the wall until she was needed, and was dismissed the moment she wasn't. She never corrected them. She had a stillness about her, a way of holding her hands loose at her sides even when a room was coming apart, and the young doctors read that stillness as slowness. They did not know that stillness was something you earned. They did not know where she had learned it. Celine had a folder in a drawer at home that she never opened. Inside, it was a photograph of 11 people in desert fatigues, squinting into a sun that turned everything the color of bone. She was the small one on the end, 23 years old, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and on her collar was a patch that said what she had been before she was furniture. Combat medic, 2 tours. She had put her hands inside more broken men than half the surgeons upstairs had ever seen, and she had done it in the dark, in the dirt, with mortars walking closer, with nothing but what she carried and what she knew. But that was not the reason she never opened the folder. She never opened it because of a name. Ramirez, a specialist, 19, from a town in Texas she could no longer remember. She could remember everything else. She could remember the exact weight of his head in her palm and the way his life had slipped away between her hands. And she could remember the voice on the radio, the calm, authoritative voice of a man safe behind a wall of protocol, telling her to hold position, do not attempt evacuation, wait for clearance. She had held, she had obeyed the order, she had done everything correctly, and Ramirez had died looking at her, and she had spent the years since learning a lesson the whole civilized world seemed determined to teach her again and again, that rules were written by people who would never have to watch someone die inside them. So she had come home, she had traded the desert for a hospital, her rank for a badge, and she had made herself small and useful and quiet, and she had promised herself one thing only: never again would she stand still and watch a life leave a body because a voice on a radio told her that saving it was against the protocol. She did not know, that night in March, how badly that promise was about to cost her. It came in at 11:40. She heard it before she saw it. The rising note of the ambulance bay doors and the particular urgency in the paramedic's voice that meant this one was bad. She was already moving. She had the trauma bay open and the lights up and the crash cart squared before the gurney was through the doors, and that was the first thing the on-call resident would later grudgingly admit under questioning, that she had been ready before anyone told her to be. The patient was young, male, early 30s, a car folded around a bridge abutment at 60 miles an hour, prolonged extrication, chest against the wheel, blood pressure falling, heart rate climbing to cover for it. His skin had the gray sheen she knew too well, the look of a body quietly failing somewhere it could not be seen. Celine had her stethoscope on his chest before the gurney stopped rolling. She heard it in half a second. The heart sounds were muffled, far away, like a fist knocking on a door through a pillow. His neck veins stood out like cords. His pressure was in his boots and dropping. "Tamponade," she said. She said it quietly, to no one, because there was no one yet who would listen. Fluid was filling the sac around his heart, squeezing it, and every beat the young man's own body took was strangling him a little more. Then someone said the name, and the room changed. A charge nurse had pulled the wallet, and she read the driver's license aloud in the voice of a person who cannot quite believe what is printed there. Daniel Cole. And then, in a smaller voice, the address, and everyone in that bay who worked in Washington knew that address, because it belonged to a man whose face was on the evening news 3 nights a week. Senator Cole. This was the senator's son. This was the only son. Celine felt the temperature of the room drop. She had seen it before. The moment a name became more important than a body, people stopped being brave. Men who would gamble on a stranger would not gamble 1 inch on someone important. She saw the resident reach for the phone instead of the patient. "Get Montgomery," the resident said. "Get the chief, now. Nobody touches him until Montgomery's here." And Celine, with her stethoscope still warm on the boy's failing chest, understood that they were going to do to Daniel Cole exactly what a voice on a radio had once done to Ramirez. They were going to hold. They were going to wait for clearance. And the clearance was going to arrive too late. Dr. Alan Montgomery did not hurry. He had built an entire career on the principle that hurrying was for lesser men, and he had the corner office and the endowed chair to prove the principle worked. When he came through the trauma bay doors that night, it was with the unbothered stride of a man walking into a meeting he intended to control. His cuffs were monogrammed in thread the color of old wine, AMM, and Celine had noticed them 100 times because he had a habit of adjusting them before he made a decision, as though smoothing the linen also smoothed the situation into something he could manage. He took one look at the boy on the table and the numbers on the screen, and he did the thing that Celine would remember for the rest of her life. He reached for a pen. He wanted the chart. He wanted the imaging. He wanted the ultrasound tech paged and the results reviewed, and the anesthesia team briefed, and a consent conversation with the family, already being driven in from Georgetown at speed. He spoke about the operating room being prepared upstairs. He spoke in the measured, reasonable, defensible language of a man assembling a case file, and every word he said was correct, and every word he said was killing Daniel Cole. "He doesn't have that long," Celine said. It came out of her before she had decided to say it. Montgomery looked at her for the first time, and it was the look you give a chair that has spoken. Mild surprise, faint distaste. "I'm sorry," he said, in a voice that was not sorry at all. "And you are?" His pressure is 60 and falling. Heart sounds are muffled. Neck veins distended. It's pericardial tamponade, and it's tension. He needs the pressure off his heart in the next few minutes, or there won't be a heart to operate on. Montgomery smoothed his cuff. "We will assess that in a controlled environment, with imaging, upstairs, when the team is scrubbed. I am not going to have a nurse dictate a surgical timeline on a patient of this profile in the middle of my trauma bay." He turned to the resident. "Type and cross 4 units. Call the OR again. Tell them I want it in 10 minutes. And get her," a small tilt of the head toward Celine, "back to whatever she was doing." 10 minutes. Celine looked at the monitor and did the arithmetic she had spent a war learning. Daniel Cole did not have 10 minutes. He had 2, maybe 3, and every one of them belonged to a system that was going to spend them filling out forms. She looked at the boy's face. He was unconscious now, his lips going the shade of slate, and for one terrible second his face was Ramirez's face, the same young slackness, the same trust in a system that was busy protecting itself. She heard the radio voice in her memory, calm and certain. "Hold position. Wait for clearance." No order was coming. She understood that with a clarity that felt almost like peace. No order was ever going to come in time. because the men who gave orders were more afraid of being blamed for a death than they were of the death itself. If Daniel Cole was going to live, it would not be because someone gave her permission. It would be because she decided to stop waiting for it. She had watched once in a field hospital that no longer existed, a technique no textbook in this building would sanction. A tear in the wall of a heart, small and deep, bleeding into the sac. No cardiac surgeon, no operating room, no time. There had been a battlefield surgeon with dirt under his nails and a catheter in his hand, and he had done a thing that was half genius and half heresy. He had slipped a small balloon catheter into the wound, into the very muscle of the heart, and inflated it just enough to press the torn edges shut from the inside. A plug of water and rubber where a stitch could not go. In the hands of the wrong person it would kill. But she had seen it hold a man's heart together long enough for the helicopter to come, and she had never forgotten the shape of it. She looked at the ultrasound the resident had finally, belatedly rolled to the bedside, and there it was, unmistakable. The flicker of a right ventricular tear leaking into the sac with every beat. She had the picture. She had the hands. She had, God help her, the knowledge. And she had about 90 seconds. "Move," Celine said. The room did not know what to do with her voice. It was not loud. It was the voice she had used in the dark, with the mortars walking closer. The voice that did not ask. And something in it made the resident step back before he had decided to. She was already at the cart. She had a Foley catheter in her gloved hand, the kind meant for a bladder and never for this, and a 10C syringe of sterile water, and a scalpel, and she was moving with an economy that made everyone around her look, suddenly, like they were standing still. "What is she doing?" said a voice from the doorway, and it was not Montgomery. It was the senator. He had arrived faster than anyone expected, a big gray man gone small and hollow-eyed, and he had a lawyer half a step behind him, and he was staring at the stranger with a blade over his son's chest. "What is she? Somebody stop her. What is she doing to my son?" His voice cracked on the last word. He was not a senator in that doorway. He was a father watching a woman he did not know work over the only child he had, and the terror in him was so total that it silenced the room more thoroughly than any order could have. Nobody moved to stop her. Nobody moved at all. They looked at the father's face, and they looked at the boy's slate lips, and they understood, without being able to say it, that they were watching the last thing that was ever going to happen to Daniel Cole, one way or the other. Montgomery said her name, or the word he used instead of her name, "Nurse. Step away from that patient. That is an order, nurse." She did not hear the end of it. She made the small incision below the sternum, exactly where the desert surgeon had made his, and the pressure of the trapped sac eased, and she felt the change in the room, that lift you feel before a storm breaks. That alone bought her a breath, but it was not enough, and she knew it, because the tear was still there, still leaking, and the sac would simply fill again. She found the wound with her fingertips, hunting by feel, as she had trained herself to hunt in the dark. There. A slit in the muscle no longer than her thumbnail, and beneath her fingers she could feel the heart trying, the frantic clench of an organ drowning in its own leak. She slid the catheter in, gently, as careful as threading a needle in a moving truck. Into the tear, not through it, seating the deflated balloon inside the muscle itself. And then she took the syringe and she pushed the water, 1 cc, 2, watching the boy's face, watching the monitor, feeling with her other hand for the exact moment the bleeding stopped. 3 cc. The leak under her fingers slowed. 4. It stopped. The balloon had swelled inside the wound and pressed its torn edges shut from within, a plug where no stitch could reach, and for one held breath the entire trauma bay of Ashford Memorial stopped breathing with it. The monitor had been screaming a flat, obscene tone. Now, into that silence, it made a different sound. A single beep, then another, then a rhythm, ragged and unwilling at first and then steadier. And the green line that had been a straight and hopeless road climbed up off the floor of the screen and began, against every prediction in that room, to draw the shape of a living heart. 60, 70. The pressure that had been in the boy's boots came up his legs and into his chest, and put a faint, impossible pink back into his slate lips. Celine did not celebrate. She held the syringe exactly where it was, her thumb steady on the plunger, her eyes on the waveform, because she knew this was not a rescue. It was a reprieve. The balloon would hold the heart together only as long as someone held the balloon. But minutes were everything. Minutes were the difference between a body they could still save and a body they could only mourn. "He has a rhythm," the resident said, and his voice broke on it, half disbelief and half something that sounded almost like grief. She's got a pressure. He's got a pressure." In the doorway, the senator made a sound that no one who heard it ever repeated. His knees went, and the lawyer caught him, and the big gray man stood there, holding onto a stranger's arm and staring at his son's chest rising and falling, and he did not know the name of the woman who had done it. He only knew that 90 seconds ago his boy had been gone, and now his boy was breathing, and the space between those two facts was a nurse he had wanted someone to stop. And Alan Montgomery stood where he had been standing the whole time. He had not moved. He had not touched the patient. His pen was still in his hand, and his cuffs were still smooth, and his face had gone a color that Celine, in the exhausted clarity of the moment, understood completely. It was not relief. It was the face of a man who has just watched the ground shift under everything he believed about who was allowed to be right. "Get him upstairs," Celine said, still not looking up, her thumb steady on the plunger. "He needs cardiac repair now, while the balloon holds. Somebody call the OR and tell them what's coming. And somebody take over this syringe with a hand that isn't going to move, because if this balloon deflates before they've got a stitch in him, we lose everything we just bought." They took him upstairs. She rode the gurney beside him with her thumb on that plunger the whole way, to the doors of the operating room where they finally, gently, made her let go. She handed the syringe to the cardiac surgeon herself and told him exactly what he would find, and she watched the doors swing shut. And then she stood in the empty hallway with the marks of the night on her gloves, and she began, very quietly, to shake. Daniel Cole lived. The cardiac team opened his chest and found precisely what she had described, and they found her impossible little balloon holding the torn edges together, and they put in the sutures that would hold for the rest of his life. And by the gray hour before dawn, he was in the intensive care unit with a heart that beat on its own. Celine did not see any of it. By the time the surgeons were closing, she was sitting in an empty break room with a cold cup of coffee she did not drink. And Alan Montgomery was in his office 2 floors up, writing. He wrote very well. He wrote a report that never once said he had been wrong. He wrote about an unlicensed procedure performed by a nurse acting far outside her scope, about a patient exposed to catastrophic risk, about the extraordinary good fortune that the patient had survived despite, he wrote, and not because of, the actions in question. He wrote the word reckless 4 times. He recommended immediate suspension and referral to the state board, and he let it be known, in the careful way he let things be known, that criminal charges were not off the table when a person practiced medicine without a license on a senator's son. By 9 that morning, Celine Marsh was sitting across a wide desk from a woman from Human Resources and a man from the hospital's legal office, and they slid a paper toward her and told her, in soft, regretful voices, that she was suspended without pay, effective immediately, and that she would surrender her badge on the way out. She surrendered her badge. It went into a small plastic bag with her locker key. She walked out through the lobby she had walked into for 3 years, past the coffee cart and the volunteers and the atrium fountain, and no one stopped her, and no one thanked her, and the automatic doors let her out into a cold, bright morning, as though she were any ordinary person who had never held a stranger's heart together with her own 2 hands. She went home to the apartment with the folder in the drawer. She did not open it. She sat on the edge of her bed in the daylight and thought about Ramirez, and about the calm voice on the radio. This time she had not stood still. She had not waited for clearance. She had done the thing, and she had been right, and the world was going to punish her for it exactly as thoroughly as it would have punished her for letting the boy die. The worst hour came at 3 in the morning, when she let herself think the thought she had been holding off all day, that if she had let Daniel Cole die the correct and defensible way, she would still have her badge and her quiet, useful place against the wall. The rules always protected the people who let others die. Then she remembered the desert surgeon with dirt under his nails, something he had said while a 19-year-old lay under his hands. He had said, "You will spend your whole life being told the rules are the medicine. They are not the medicine. They are the wall around the medicine. Sometimes you have to go over the wall." She had gone over the wall, and now she was going to have to stand in front of the people who had built it and explain why. She made her choice at dawn. She would not resign quietly, the way they clearly wanted her to. She would go to the review and tell the truth, all of it, and let them do what they were going to do. Not because she thought it would save her, but because Daniel Cole was alive, and somebody in that building ought to have to say so out loud, in the light, on the record. The world made it 3 days later, and it did not come from the direction anyone expected. Senator Cole had spent those 3 days in a chair beside his son's bed, and a man in a chair beside a hospital bed has a great deal of time to ask questions. He asked the cardiac surgeon what exactly had been done to save his son, and the cardiac surgeon, who was an honest man, told him. He told him about the tamponade and the tear and the 90 seconds, and he told him, because it was true, that in 20 years he had never seen anything like the field technique that held that boy's heart together long enough to reach his table. The senator asked to see the report. They gave him Montgomery's report, the one with the word reckless in it 4 times, and he read it in the fluorescent light of the ICU waiting room, and then he read it again, and something in the big gray man went very still and very cold. He had spent 30 years in a city that ran on paper exactly like this. He knew the smell of a document written to protect its author. He knew what it looked like when a powerful man rearranged the truth into a shape that made him the hero of a story he had nearly ruined. He made a telephone call, then he made several more. The lawyer who had caught him in that doorway was a litigator of some reputation, and by the end of the week, she had obtained the trauma bay's own record of that night. Not the report, the record, the timestamps, the monitor logs, the pharmacy pulls. And the timestamps told a different story than the report did. The report said a nurse had acted rashly and outside all reason. The timestamp said that Alan Montgomery had entered the trauma bay at 11:51, that at 11:53 he had ordered the operating room readied in 10 minutes, that at 11:54 the monitor logs recorded the patient's cardiac arrest, that at 11:55 a Foley catheter and a syringe of sterile water had been pulled from the crash cart, and that at 11:56 the same monitor recorded the return of a spontaneous rhythm. The record showed, in the cold, indifferent language of machines that do not care about anyone's reputation, that the chief of surgery had scheduled a repair for a boy who would have been dead 4 minutes before the room was ever ready. The litigator laid the report and the timestamps side by side on the senator's desk, and she said the thing lawyers say when they have found the seam in a case. She said, "He wrote that she killed the timeline. The machine says she was the timeline." She said, "A hospital review board can dismiss a nurse. It cannot dismiss its own monitors." And Senator Cole, who had wanted somebody to stop her, who had stood in that doorway begging for her to be pulled away from his son, put his hand flat on the record and said, in a voice that had confirmed judges and buried bills, "Then we are going to that review, and we are going to bring the machines." They convened the board on a Tuesday, in the long paneled room on the top floor where the hospital settled the fates of the people who worked in it. 7 of them sat at the table, and Alan Montgomery sat among them in a fresh pressed coat, with his monogrammed cuffs showing, because he was not the one on trial. Celine Marsh was on trial. She sat at the far end in the plain clothes of a woman with no badge, her hands loose and still in her lap. Montgomery spoke first, and he spoke beautifully. He walked them through the report as though he were walking them through a museum, pausing at each violation. He said that he understood the impulse to celebrate a survival, but that medicine could not be practiced on impulse, and that if this board excused what this nurse had done because it happened to work, they would be inviting every technician in the building to gamble with lives on the strength of a lucky guess. He smoothed his cuff. He said the patient had survived despite her actions, not because of them, and he said it with such gentle certainty that Celine watched 2 members of the board begin, visibly, to nod. Then the chairman asked if there was anyone present to speak on the nurse's behalf, expecting, clearly, no one, and the door at the back of the paneled room opened, and Senator Cole walked in with his litigator beside him. The room came to its feet for him, as rooms did for men like him. He waved them down. He said he was not there as a senator, and everyone understood that this is the thing men say precisely when they intend to be one. He said he was there as the father of the boy on the table that night, and that he had a few documents he thought the board might find relevant before it decided anything. The litigator distributed the timestamps. Celine felt it turn, that lift before the storm breaks. She watched the board members look down at the papers and go still, one by one, as the trauma bay had gone still. She watched the chairman's finger travel down the column of times, and she watched him do the arithmetic she had done in her head with a scalpel already in her hand, and she watched him arrive, 4 minutes too late and safe in a paneled room, at the answer she had bet a boy's life on. The litigator did not raise her voice. She never had to, she said. The report before you states that the patient survived despite the intervention. The record before you states that at the moment of the intervention, the patient had no cardiac output, and that 10 minutes was the soonest an operating room would have been available. She let that sit. She said, I invite anyone at this table to explain how a patient in cardiac arrest survives a 10-minute wait for an operating room without an intervention. I invite the author of the report, in particular. Every face at the table turned to Alan Montgomery. He smoothed his cuff. It was the first time Celine had ever seen the gesture fail him. His hand moved over the linen, and the linen did not smooth the situation into anything he could manage, because there was nothing to manage. There was only the record, cold and green and true, saying the thing he had spent a report trying to unsay. He opened his mouth and said something about the unpredictability of arrest and the possibility of spontaneous conversion, and the words came out of him thin and wrong, and he heard them come out wrong, and he stopped. The chairman was a cardiac surgeon himself, in his last years, a man who had actually held hearts in his hands before he had held meetings. He set the timestamps down and looked for a long moment, not at Montgomery and not at the senator, but at Celine Marsh, sitting quiet and still at the far end of the table. He asked her one question. He asked her where she had learned to do what she had done. And Celine, who had come to tell the truth, told it. She told them about the desert and the field hospital that no longer existed, and the surgeon with dirt under his nails. And then she told them the part that lived in the folder she never opened. She told them about Ramirez, 19, and the calm voice on the radio that had told her to hold position and wait for clearance, and about how she had obeyed the order and watched a boy die inside her hands. She said, I made a promise after that I would never again stand still and watch a life leave a body because I was waiting for permission that was never coming in time. She looked down the table, past all of them, and she said, no order was coming for Daniel Cole. I knew it in that room, the way you know weather. So I stopped waiting for one. She folded her hands again. She said, I understand that I broke the rules. I have never once claimed I didn't. I am only telling you that the boy is alive, and that the rule would have buried him, and that I would rather answer to this table for saving him than answer to myself for the other thing. I have already done the other thing. I am not doing it again. The room was very quiet when she finished. Somewhere down the long table a pitcher of water sat sweating a ring onto the polished wood, and that small ordinary sound was the only sound in the room, while 7 people who decided the fates of others sat with the truth in front of them and no comfortable place to put it. They did not decide that day. Boards never do. But the thing had turned, and when they filed out, Alan Montgomery did not smooth his cuff, because there was no longer anything the gesture could pretend to fix. The findings came down 2 weeks later, and they were the closest thing to justice she had ever been handed by an institution. The board found that Celine Marsh had acted outside her licensed scope of practice. They did not pretend otherwise, and neither did she. But they found, on the strength of the record and the testimony, that she had done so in a genuine emergency, with clear justification, in a manner directly responsible for saving the patient's life, and that no reasonable alternative had existed in the time available. They lifted her suspension. They reinstated her with full back pay, and instead of the criminal referral Montgomery had threatened, they recommended that the hospital sponsor her, immediately, into the advanced practice program she had earned 3 times over, in a desert none of them had ever seen. And they made one other finding, quietly, in the part of the document the public never reads. They found that the incident report submitted by the chief of surgery had materially misrepresented the clinical timeline in a manner inconsistent with the hospital's own records, and they referred that finding, in turn, to the very kind of review Alan Montgomery had tried to use against her. He kept his license. Men like him usually do. But he did not keep the corner office, and he did not keep the endowed chair, and he did not keep the thing he had valued more than either, which was the assumption of every person in that building that when Montgomery reached for his pen, he was reaching for the truth. He had spent it on a report, and it did not come back. Celine went to see Daniel Cole before she went back to work. He was sitting up by then, thin and young and alive, with a long healing line down the center of his chest, and no memory at all of the night that had put it there. He did not know her. Why would he? But his father knew her. The senator was in the chair by the bed, and when she came in he stood, the big gray man, and he did a thing she had not expected and never forgot. He took her hand in both of his and held it, and he said, "I wanted someone to stop you. I stood in that door and I begged God for someone to pull you off my boy." He looked at his son sitting up in the bed. He said, "I have spent 30 years believing I knew who to trust in a crisis. The people I would have trusted were writing reports." He tightened his grip on her hand. He said, "You were the only person in that room who was not afraid. Thank you. That is not a large enough word, but it is the one I have." Celine did not have a large word either. She said the true one. She said, "He's a strong young man. He did most of it himself." And then, because it was also true, she said, "I'm just glad I didn't have to wait." She went back to work on a Monday, and the ones who had looked through her for 3 years did not look through her anymore. Some of them could not meet her eyes, and some of them nodded to her in the halls with a new and careful respect. And one young resident, the one who had reached for the phone instead of the patient, stopped her by the crash cart and said quietly, ashamed, "I froze. That night, I froze, and you didn't, and I've been thinking about it ever since." What made you not freeze? Celine looked at him for a moment, this young man who was going to stand in 100 rooms where a name was more important than a body, and a voice on some radio was telling everyone to wait. She said, "The ones who freeze aren't afraid of the patient dying. They're afraid of being the one who gets blamed." She picked up her paperwork, the ordinary paperwork of an ordinary shift she was grateful beyond speech to be working. She said, "I decided a long time ago which regret I could live with. Figure out which one you can't live with. Then you'll know what you'll do." And she went to check her patients. There is a challenge coin that she keeps now on the windowsill of the apartment where the folder used to live in a drawer. It came in the mail a month after the board's findings, with no letter, only a card in a senator's own hand that said 4 words, "For the 90 seconds." She had turned it face down at first. She does not keep it face down anymore. She stands it upright, where the morning light finds it, and beside it now sits the photograph she used to keep buried. 11 people squinting into a sun the color of bone, and a 19-year-old whose name she says out loud sometimes, into the quiet, so that somebody still does. Because she understands the things she went into that trauma bay not yet able to say. The rules are the wall around the medicine, built by people who were right to build it and wrong to worship it. Most days you stay behind the wall, and you should. But every so often a life is on the other side of it, running out of minutes, and no order is coming, and the only person who can go over is the one everybody in the room has spent years deciding not to see. The coin catches the light, and that, she thinks, is the whole of it. Not that the arrogant should fall, though sometimes, when the machines are keeping time, they do. Only that the overlooked one should at last be seen, and the truth of what she did be spoken out loud, in the light, where it can never be taken back. These stories are made with love. If this one stayed with you, and you believe the quiet, unseen ones are worth rooting for, subscribe and stay with me a while. That is all I ask.